Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another Photo Mish Mash. This one being broadcast live July 28th, 2021. I'm really excited about the show I'm excited about the show every week, but I'm really excited because we've brought in a new guest. And I could make jokes about trying to find a replacement for Steve, who I think is never coming back from France, or will only want to talk about baguettes in the future. But that's not why I brought Talor. And I brought Talor in because she has a fascinating intersection between climate science and photography, which is both something that is really appealing to me and I think has an interesting voice to kind of share these thoughts. So I'm really excited to introduce to the show for the first time, maybe not the last time, although I told her she could wait till after the show to see if she say she'll do it again. Talor Stone. Talor, how you doing?
Hey guys, I'm really great. How are you, y'all? Thank you for having me here.
You bet. You bet. Yeah. And we will talk lots with you. As I just said, you're working towards a PhD in climate science. You also are passionate about photography and a photography educator as well. You can see lots of Talor's beautiful work at Talor Stone Photography on Instagram. And from there, you can find links to more of her site. And her Facebook is linked right down below this. So if you would, please go check that out and give it a follow. It's a nice way to thank our guests for their time. And welcoming back to the show, David Carr. David, how are you doing?
I'm good. Good to be back. Yeah, this is like 2 weeks in a row. So, you know.
I know we had a big break there with some summer travel. You've been posting great pictures from the South Dakota workshop. So folks, take a look at that.
Thank you. It's been, you know, that's all I have right now to post because there's a wedding I shot a few weeks ago. I'm not quite ready to post anything from that. And it's always weird going like a wedding shot and then a shot of some prairie dogs and then a shot of a mountain and then some architectural thing. I don't know. I kind of shoot a lot of different things, but yeah, thank you. I'm still going through those images and, you know, I was really, it's funny because when we went to South Dakota, to be honest, I was not really thinking I was going to come away with that many keeper images. And I've just found so many that I really love. So
that's awesome.
Exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I was just really impressed with the sheer number of pictures and the variety too. You know, you don't, maybe this is a little small-minded of me, but you don't necessarily think of South Dakota as kind of a hotbed of a variety of pictures. You've got some wildlife in there. You've got some incredible landscapes, and some just really cool details as well. And I mean, I've been to Badlands many, many years ago, so I shouldn't be small-minded.
Well, I had no idea what to expect. I mean, the Badlands I'd heard of the Badlands. I don't even know if I'd ever really looked at images. So I really didn't know what we were going to see. And I was blown away. It was just so different, the terrain. And then, you know, when you get some good light on it, and that's really where I'm starting to focus a lot more of my images that I share is I really want the light to be doing something beautiful or the color or, you know, it's that extra little feature in the photograph that can kind of really push it over the edge. Sure. I'm usually looking for that. Not that we all aren't, but I'm like, okay, well, where is it in my array of all my raw photos? Oh, this one looks like it might have some promise. So that tends to be what I go with.
Yeah, nice. And I'm so glad you mentioned light because, you know, for anybody watching the show who hasn't before, maybe Talor, you shared out, and you know, there's a few others folks watching that haven't seen it before. It's a mishmash of all things photography. We generally chat about the week's photography news, anything that's interesting to us, what the guests have been up to since they've last been on. And one of the topics that we're going to talk about today is travel photography tips. Last week we shared kind of like managing your expectations and when you go on a family vacation and how to get better family vacation pictures. But how about now when you're traveling for the specific reason of capturing beautiful photos? And light plays into one of my tips. It might play into your all's tips as well. Well, let's switch back to Talor for a second. Talor, you just came back from Katmai National Park in Alaska, Brooks Falls. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so I got really lucky to score some permits to camp at Brooks Falls. It was amazing. This has been a very long time bucket list place for me. I hate the term bucket list. I shouldn't use that. But I think there's just something wrong with thinking about life and lists like that. It's not a checkbox, but it's somewhere that I've really wanted to go for a long time. And when the CDC loosened their recommendations for how many people could be in an area at a time, they allowed more permits for camping, and I found out about it. And it was one of those things where you're just hitting refresh on recreation.gov, and I scored them. So I was really excited. So I flew up to Alaska. It was kind of a last minute trip. It was just a whirlwind from beginning to end, and showed up at Brooks Falls. It rained my first 2 days there, which was good and bad. As you're aware, shooting wildlife in the rain can be really challenging because you don't have great light, and you have to shoot at high shutter speeds, and it just, you have to bump up your ISO, and it creates some technical challenges that you wouldn't have if you had plenty of light. But it kept the people away.
There you go.
Yes.
And it turns out bears are still very hungry if it's raining outside.
Oh, good.
They don't seem to be as bothered, do they?
Yeah.
They are not nearly as bothered as us humans are. So the bears were in abundance. At one time, we counted 37 bears at a single time at the waterfall. It was just unbelievable.
That's incredible.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Incredible.
That's really cool.
Wow.
I'm just real quick going to share your Instagram. You've got this shot here, right here, a recent picture of this mama kind of defending her perch.
Yes.
Which is just so cool.
That's
so
amazing.
It's pretty fascinating because, you have this waterfall, there's lots of bears out there, and it tends to be the dominant males who are quite large that take these upper areas. And there's some particular places along the waterfall that you're pretty quick to notice, like these are the prime spots. And this mother bear, her name is Grazer, that's what she's affectionately known as, and her two cubs, she just took up residence at the number one most hotly contested spot out there. And she held her own all afternoon until she was nice and fat. She was the most efficient fish catcher of any bear that I saw out there. She was by far the most talented. And she was not going to get pushed around by any of these big males. They really were cowering to her. It was pretty impressive.
That's awesome. And that's one of the things, and I don't know, I want to hear a little bit about how you got into photography here in a minute, but that's one of the things that I love about going out to these locations is not just being able to capture this, but seeing it for my own eyes. As a kid growing up, watching nature documentaries, always very interesting, but then to be able to be out there and experience these kind of interactions between wild animals is just such a cool thing. And then being able to capture it is bonus.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I mean, you can be so close at Brooks Falls because of the way that they have it set up. It's all very safe, and the bears really don't even notice that you're there at all.
Amazing.
I mean, you can be, 50 yards away from these bears that are having an all-out brawl, and somehow you're totally safe, and they don't care about you. And it's pretty amazing to be able to share this space. Like, it's the ultimate fly on a wall experience that I think wildlife photographers in particular are probably seeking out, where you just have these really natural behaviors that are occurring in front of you and you're not having an influence on them.
Yeah. I say out on the coast on the Katmai trip that we do, no fences, but it is very similar in that the bears really don't care about you. I mean, every once in a while you might see them look over and check in on you, but the guides and the rangers kind of all manage that to make sure that people are being intelligent when they're in there, and you're just not giving the bears a reason to be interested in you. They're interested in the food they're trying to get. They're interested in the other bears. But it's just a neat experience. That's cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Taylor, before we hear a little bit more about you, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for the chat room to join us live today. I really appreciate you all taking time out of your day, and especially, East Coast folks. I know, Taylor, you're in Pensacola, Florida. David, you're in the Atlanta, Georgia area. And, this is kind of a reasonable time. But for us West Coast, it's right in the middle of the day. So if you've joined us on the West Coast, thank you. Extra appreciation there. But again, everybody.
True champions.
Yes, that's right. Thanks for joining us and saying hi. If you haven't already, just give the show a quick thumbs up. That's a nice way to let people know that it's worthwhile their time. And as I said, if you haven't already, please take a moment and go follow Taylor and David on their respective Instagrams.
So finding me online is always a pop quiz of whether or not you can spell my name. So it's Taylor without a Y. You'd be shocked. Some person with a Y in their name and the last name Stone gets an awful lot of my misdirected emails, so I apologize for that.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I didn't notice there wasn't a Y until just a couple of days ago. And again, I told you this before the show. I noticed, I don't know how you came across my radar, but more than a year ago, you were in Greenland or headed there or just came back. I'm not sure what. And we are going there eventually on a workshop. Hopefully. And also that you were combining kind of climate science with your passion in photography. And also then I noticed that you work with Nisi Optics, which is,
yes,
I love Nisi filters. I think they are some of the best system filters out there. So all of those things combined, I was like, this would be a great person to have onto the show.
Awesome. I'm glad I'm checking all the boxes.
But give us a little background and a couple of things. As I said, this show's pretty informal. One, I never told you how long it goes. Typically, we like to be about an hour to 90 minutes or so, and we've got a good number of images to review too. So I want to leave that. So I just say that to give us the kind of 30,000 foot view of how you arrived at this intersection of photography and climate science.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that it wasn't part of a 5-year plan that I arrived at intentionally. I think the best journeys are often that way. You just kind of stumble into them. But for me, I really wanted to pursue my education. I'm a huge nerd. I love academia. I love researching a variety of topics, which has always been a problem, that I just love everything and I could never pick. So I knew I wanted to pursue a PhD, and I started in the international relations field. I very quickly latched onto the Arctic as the region that I was particularly interested in. But when I started, I was very interested in geopolitical issues. So the balancing of how do we manage the opening of the Northwest Passage, and how do we manage our American interactions with Russia and China and all these other actors who are very interested in playing a role in the Arctic. So it was really like high level strategic research. And that all changed the first time I went to Greenland in 2018, and I stepped foot in this incredible place, and my life was forever changed by it. You know, at this time I was already doing photography, but it wasn't really with a conservation mindset. It was really just traditional landscape photography. And I would say that I wasn't a person on a mission, but now I think that I am a person on a mission, because I just fell in love with Greenland. And having those experiences and being in that place and that physical connection to this really unique environment, the interactions with the people there, and it just completely changed the way that I think about the Arctic. It was no longer this vague place that's a million miles away. You know, it was real and it was tangible and it deserved to be protected. And, you know, it was worthy in its own right of our consideration, not from a political and strategic view, but it has value by itself. It's not about, for me, it quit being about politics and strategy, and it started to be a thing that had its own intrinsic value. So my photography has shifted in that direction to really conveying a more conservation mindset. But then my research also pivoted to really focusing on climate issues and how it affects Greenland's indigenous people.
Wow.
And can you, because, you know, I had you on the show, this was interesting to me, so I just want to pick your brain a little bit. What are some of the things you are finding in that? How is it affecting the indigenous people of Greenland?
Oh boy, you could really open a can of worms with this one.
Yeah.
Okay. So my most recent project that I've worked on is modeling human migration in Greenland. So I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this. So I literally take a statistical model and I build a statistical model that looks a lot like a map. And there's dots for each city, and you can move through time and see arrows where people are moving in and out of. So it's a migration map, and it shows how people are moving over time. And the reason that I pursued this project is because, first off, it had never been done before. So that's always exciting. And the other part that's interesting is that I've spent some time in the rural communities in Greenland, and I've seen the way that changes in the ice flow are affecting their way of life, the way that they're able to transport, get supplies in the winter, partake in fishing opportunities. So their world is really changing pretty rapidly. And I was curious to see whether or not people were leaving these rural communities as a result of a changing climate. So the model at this stage, it's not fully complete, but I have some preliminary results which are showing that in some areas people are actually abandoning their settlements, and there is some correlation to a warming climate. But in other areas like the South, which is fascinating, people are actually settling into rural areas because now all of a sudden it's warmer and you can grow crops and you can have sheep. And, so climate change is not this black and white thing. It's hard to look at this very nebulous concept and say climate change bad. I mean, I think it is bad, but there are always winners and losers in every situation. And I think what this project has revealed is just how much of a gray area there is.
Interesting.
Yeah. Interesting. That's really interesting. So the Joker in me wants to say, David Carr, maybe your next beach vacation will be Southern Greenland.
Yeah, exactly.
Do it.
I mean, Beach Boys songs and everything, Corona Light. Probably not Corona.
Please don't. Too soon is too soon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's really interesting, fascinating. So thank you for sharing that. And also, yes, for taking such a huge weighty topic and kind of, summarizing it so nicely.
Yeah. And it was very eloquent and like convincing that because I know that issue gets so politicized by everybody. And some things need to be politicized, but I think a lot of times when the political noise is ringing at a peak, a lot of people tune it out, or they just don't even know what to do with it, and it's almost like it's not a constructive way to maybe move forward. And so it sounds like you're trying to, by actually going and working with people and seeing the real time effects of what's happening. It's. Not a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of people who've done that. So
I think it's really unfortunate when politics take over these very important topics. For me, I have political views, right? Everybody does, but I really try and approach research from an apolitical perspective. And I think you have to if you're participating in science. That's what science is supposed to be. So for me, sometimes, wouldn't it be so easy if all the results that I got are, wow, climate change is horrible? That would be such a simple answer. I would love that. That'd be great, that I would have this really simple answer. But sometimes the messy thing is the reality, and it's my responsibility to make sure that I'm sharing it in, a true way, and that I'm actually sharing facts. And even if, it may be less convenient, what the reality is.
Talor, how long are you in Greenland at any given time? Did you kind of live there part-time? Is that what you were saying? Or
Oh, no.
Okay.
That would be awesome, though.
Okay.
No, so my first trip to Greenland, I was there for about 4 weeks. My second time in Greenland, I was there for a little over a month.
Wow. And
I was supposed to, in 2020, be there for almost about 2.5 months, which then got postponed to 2021, which is now postponed again to 2022. So the can is getting kicked down the road.
That's fascinating. And you, I think we just talked about it pre-show that a little bit. There's a documentary that you are part of. Yeah, tell us a little bit more.
It's amazing. So it's going to be so fantastic, not only because it is by 2 women, but it is by 2 redheaded women, which I love. World, watch out. So you should really, anyone listening, you have to go follow Ashley Payne. Her handles on everything, including YouTube, is Tracing Thought. So it's Tracing Thought. She has the most incredible YouTube channel. You could get lost for hours, but she's an independent filmmaker, and she really prides herself on creating films that show Indigenous perspectives through their own eyes. Yes, that is Ashley. She is so talented, and I'm really, really excited to be teaming up with her to produce a documentary, which will now be in 2022. And so we're using kind of the foundation of my PhD research, which is about the climate interactions on Indigenous people in Greenland. And we're going to be using that as the framework. Yeah, her website's just beautiful. So we will be looking at issues of transition in Greenland. So how are people moving from a more traditional lifestyle to modernity? How are people dealing with these climate transitions? And of course, there's the political transition in Greenland where they're still fighting for their independence. So we're going to be looking at the theme of transition across multiple topics.
Wow.
That's right. Because Greenland is actually under Denmark's rule. Is that right?
They are a protectorate of Denmark, which a lot of people are not aware of.
I wasn't aware of.
Yeah, so they have been moving towards independence for a while now. It's very managed and all pretty cordial at this point, but you know, a lot of people would like their independence. So I think it's time to be kind of honest about, you know, colonialism's probably not super appropriate in this day and age, and
not so much,
it might be time to let this one go. But of course, Denmark has a lot of incentives to not let them go. They're pretty much their only foothold in the Arctic Council. So this tiny country can have an outsized vote in a very large regional organization. So there's definitely some tension there.
Yeah. Wow. Cool. All right. Well, that's great. I kind of joked before the show that sometimes I feel like, you know, we have a fantastic guest on, but then maybe, you know, we've got a little bit about you, but we also have to do the regular show. We need to review some images. So we are going to dive into that part. These are images submitted by our fantastic community, our pen members. I'm getting a little feedback. And if you are watching the show and you're not a pen member, you could consider joining photorec.tv/pen to learn more about it. Okay, fantastic first year price of just $24. It's a lot of folks are doing Patreon, and I used to do Patreon, which is awesome. But through this pen community that I founded, I'm able to offer multiple videos, articles every week added from me, David, Ali, Steve, David Carr. You have done guest videos and guest articles as well. And it's just a fantastic learning resource, plus, most importantly, an awesome community. I just love the people that are part of it. And the best way I think to describe it, and if you watched the show before, you've heard me talk about it, the people interact with each other online as if they were in the same room, which is just so much, it's so different than the typical online interactions I see where somebody posts, here's this picture I shot of the moon, give me some feedback. And the first post is somebody's like, this is on somebody else's page, I'm saying. The first post is like, you're an idiot for shooting the moon. There's a million moon shots. We don't need to see yours. That's not helpful. That's not helping anybody learn. And we just don't see that in the pen community, and I love it. So thank you for those who are watching, who are part of it. Those who are kind of looking for a community where they can get support, learn more. We have content that is useful for all levels of photographers. You can look at everything we offer at photorec.tv/pen is the easiest way to get there. And if you've got any questions, you want a little bit more sample for free that's on there, send me an email. I'll share a few videos. You even tell me what you're interested in: Lightroom, portraiture, posing guides, the business side of things. Let me know, and I'll share a little bit with you. Okay. That said, let's jump into one of our favorite parts of the show, is where we take some time to look at your images, give you some feedback, and often use it as a teaching tool. Lightroom, sometimes Photoshop, depending. First up, we've got this shot from Pam Case, mother and child, and behind the scenes, she shared a little bit more. This was captured in the Galapagos. Very cool. I don't love the idea, Talor, of bucket list either, but Galapagos is certainly high on my list of places that I'd love to visit.
Definitely.
And so that's very cool. And Pam had a specific question of, is there too much going on around this shot? And I'll say this, Pam, I love this idea of, here's this mom, here's this cute little fuzzy seal with her sea lion. I can't remember which ones have ears and which don't.
Sea lion.
There you go.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for answering that one.
Got this.
But I tell you, I really struggle with this because we don't have faces of either of them. That immediately kind of takes me away from this moment. The mom is looking away from us. The baby has just stuck his head. Maybe he's nursing, or maybe he's just snuggling. I don't know. Just stuck his head out of the way. And that takes this down a notch or two.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just it had the potential to be a really great moment, and it probably was a great moment to see in person. But when you're capturing a snapshot, I shouldn't use the word snapshot. When you're capturing a frame of it, that's that's a photograph that you gosh, if you can get those faces looking even just remotely in the direction of the camera, especially if you have, if the mother was turned around looking at the camera, but the baby was still hidden, the face, it's still kind of a strike against you, I think, on that photo. So, yeah.
I would be curious to see if she had any other images in this series. Perhaps we could get a side profile, and that would greatly improve it.
Yeah, I agree. All right, thanks, Pam. We're going to move on. We've got Roger's Universal Order.
I love this. It reminds me of a feather.
Yeah.
Just like the pattern.
Yep. I love this too. In coming over YouTube, it might be tricky. I think most people realize that what this is dewdrops or moisture on a spider's web. The web is so hard to see that at first glance, you're just kind of taking in this pattern of drops suspended. And then you start to notice the little threads connecting them. And I love that. It's a puzzle, and your brain takes a moment to kind of register and take it all in. The drops are all so nice and sharp.
Yeah.
This is beautiful. I really like the shallow depth of field that was used. It adds a lot to the image. My advice would be possibly bumping up the whites and the tone curve to really kind of, it's kind of flat feeling. And bumping up the whites could really boost this photo.
Yeah, good suggestion.
Breathe some life into it.
Yeah, I think that's nice. Taylor, do you typically use the tone curve as opposed to working through the whites and the blacks in the basics panel?
I do. I use the tone curve because I like to be able, I find that it's a little bit more refined, particularly than the contrast slider, because you can take a lot of control over just the white and black points and be more fine in your manipulation of them.
And this is why I love having other voices on from time to time. We don't talk about the tone curve too much. I do use it. I typically have a slight S curve that I add to mini pictures, but beyond that, I don't do a whole lot with it. And then as a result, don't talk about it a whole lot, but it is very powerful.
The best tip that I would say for the tone curve, for me and my style, one of the very first things I do after I crop is I go to the tone curve, and right where you have it at the white point at the very top right, if you hover over it and you get the double-sided arrow, it has to be the double-sided arrow and not that crosshair. So it's kind of difficult to get the double-sided arrows when you hover, and then you can just grab it and slide it along that top while you're maintaining it at the very top. Yeah, so it has to be the double-sided arrow or it won't work.
Was I not getting the double-sided?
No, it's tricky. It's kind of annoying to hover over it and get it. But if you do get the arrow, then you can set that white point over. There you go.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so you just slide the white over until the white in the frame is kind of where you want them, and it can be really helpful.
That's
and you
great.
usually do that before you set any other points on the curve.
Nice. Very cool.
That's a great tip. Yeah, I've used the tone curve here and there. Sometimes I use it for portraiture to kind of give like an intentionally flatter image, bring the bottom end of like the shadows, bring those up a little bit. And so you actually have no true blacks in a photo. Like it works really well in a lot of portraiture stuff. Kind of gives it almost that Instagram filter vibe.
Yeah.
But I do like the idea of using this to fine tune your highlights and shadows to really bring out the best in the photo. And this is a cool shot. It's just one of those, like, throughout nature, there are these really cool patterns and repeating patterns and just these little anomalies of nature. And I think you captured it really well.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful.
Fine-tuning it.
Nice job, Roger. Thank you. We're going to move on. Marcy's got her open shed, clearly nicely using it as a framing device. Now, Marcy and I have been working behind the scenes. She has been struggling a little bit to get prints matching her monitor. And it's very interesting, Marcy. What I saw you post on Facebook, you posted this in our Facebook community, has a very different color than what I'm looking at here. This is very, a good bit green tinted is how I would describe this here. So I'm going to correct for that first. I'm just going to drag my slider to the right a bit, moving away from the green tint somewhere in here, I think. And I noticed you're using the profile of Adobe Standard. Taylor, do you use these often, the profiles?
I really don't. I just kind of leave them as they are. Maybe I'm missing out on something, but I don't really.
No, it's too many choices.
No. Yeah.
I get lost. I don't even use presets a lot because it's like going to the eye doctor, and does it look better when I do this? Does it look better when I do that? I don't know. I like to do my own thing.
One of the things that I do to help balance a yellow cast in an image or a green cast sometimes is the new color grading tool. Do y'all play with that much?
Yeah.
I love, so oftentimes I will take the shadow point and I'll move the shadows very slightly into dark blue. And I mean, very, very slightly, because shadows naturally are blue. And so a very tiny movement over to blue, I find can often get rid of that yellow cast and also deepen your shadows.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have to say, I often find myself warming the shadows a little bit to battle back the blue, especially if taken, maybe when the light isn't great, the little bit of the harsher light. But in this shot, I think that dealt with the issue. And Marcy it looks like, already worked in the color grading panel a little bit here. We're working with her D&G so we can see her edits, which I always like. People always ask, what format should I send into the show? If you want us to see the finished JPEG, that's fine. But I love the D&Gs because we get to see the finished product, but we also then get to see your edits and can tweak them if we feel like we need to. So, and I feel like in the highlights, Marcy, you have pushed into kind of, I'd say, the teal range, which I'm just going to, actually I'm going to do is I'm going to just turn this off for a second and see how much of the color difference is coming from our color grading panel. A good amount.
And I would say some of it's subjective. It's, what do you want to see? What do you want to see? But I have really been honing in on color lately between shadows and highlights and trying to figure out where things need to land, because there is color science, and there's the color wheel, and there are certain colors that complement each other really well. And a lot of times our cameras, especially in just natural settings, a lot of times our cameras don't assemble the colors in the right format where they go together. You almost have to kind of do some of that after the fact. You just don't want to be super heavy handed with it.
Right. It's definitely a less is more approach, but I do like this kind of bluer edit because it's a very lonesome looking tree, and I kind of like the way the color is making me feel.
Yeah.
It's a powerful reinforcer of the kind of visual aspect of this image. Yeah. All right. So, some color tweaks there that Marcy, you can, or you can say, no, I don't like what they're talking about. But let's talk a little bit about the framing and how much of the barn we've got. What do we think? Is we like all of that? And when we look at the wider shot here that isn't cropped, we can see that it's a saggy old saddleback barn. And I think it's a good idea to come in past that, as you did, Marcy.
Yeah.
And then what if we come in just a little bit tighter so there's a little bit more of a symmetrical feel to it, without that kind of window and that vertical piece over there on the right. Although, honestly, I'm not sure that it matters that much.
I wonder how I'm wondering how a square crop would look. I don't do a lot of square crops, but that's probably a little too much. Sometimes you have to try, but
it takes away the leading lines of the side.
It does. There's not enough on the left and right. Yeah, I sometimes you just have to try it, or like an 8x10 or a.
Yep. Let's come back to around here. Yeah.
I feel like I want to lose a little bit of the grass in the foreground, but.
Yeah, I think so.
We
can come up somewhere in this vicinity, maybe where the start of that kind of little bit of that bushier grass bits show up.
Yeah.
So we have a little bit. So again, for those watching who maybe haven't watched before or weren't paying attention, we say crop to tell the best story. Don't crop to fill some frame at Michael's craft store. And a little bit of a wider perspective here, I think, lends itself well to this landscape, which is a little bit wider. So Talor mentioned the color reinforcing the loneliness. Now the crop reinforces kind of the openness of the landscape. So, yeah, I think this is great. The only other thing that I might work with, Marcy, and play around with a little bit is just painting on a little bit more texture, clarity on the barn bits themselves. I think I'd like them to stand out and look a little bit more weathered from the texture of the grass and the kind of the freshness of that. But very cool.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Great shot.
Thank you. Let's move on. Mike has soft and delicate.
It's really beautiful.
It is. It is. It's very nice. I think the depth of field you chose here, Mike, is nice. We have good sharpness on our inner petals, but then that fall off is lovely. Really nice dark background. I mean, getting a little picky, this one green leaf poking out below this petal here could be cleaned up, but otherwise, this is a very nice shot.
Yeah. I don't have much to say, really.
Okay,
agreed.
Let's move on. Jeremy's got one from Alaska. He's a pen member living in Alaska, and common merganser.
Nice.
I like how the mountain in the background tells a nice story. I hate to give composition advice after the picture has been taken, right? Because it's not like you can fix it. But perhaps if you were to encounter a similar composition in the future, you could get a little bit lower to kind of line the bird up a little bit more with what's interesting in the background, just so there's not so much separation between the bird and the mountain. Of course, you don't want them to necessarily overlap, but I think just a little bit closer would be nice.
Yep, I think that's a good point. And I feel the same. We often are like, well, if you had just stepped a little to the left or a little to the right.
Yeah, it's so unhelpful.
But these are good things for folks to think about when they're back out in the field, in the future, taking pictures. So it's good lessons. Yeah, and if you wanted to cheat a little bit, content-aware scaling in Photoshop could probably let you condense the space and get it a little bit tighter without too much issue there if you wanted to go that route.
I'll tell you, just like, if I can just rant for a second, I'm not afraid to do stuff like that anymore. Like, because you have what you have here is a really cool shot. This is a beautiful bird. I love the light. I love the color of the water. I love the mountains, and you have the elements there to kind of make it what you want. I mean, we have the tools, and so, definitely, as Taylor was saying, I think, when you're back in that kind of situation, like, really think about that framing as you're looking through the viewfinder. But I personally wouldn't have a problem doing some Photoshop magic and bringing that whole subject, that front subject, up towards the mountain a little bit. I think it's, I don't know. There's different opinions on that, but
it's actually funny doing these things because you get to see how different people think. So I'm like almost a purist when it comes to that. So we're pretty far apart on it, but no judgment.
Yeah. Well, I don't like to make a super habit out of that. It just, there are times when I'm like, well, dang it, I've got all the stuff that I wanted to see. I just didn't quite nail the composition. So I'm just going to bring it together, and as long as no one knows. But,
I think that's, it's a personal preference, and it is art. And so it's your art. Yeah. Jeremy's in chat. He says it was hard to get down lower on the rocky beach. Trust me, I wanted to. Jeremy, don't you have an articulating screen? Use that articulating screen. I think that's a great suggestion.
If you have to.
If you get a little lower. Yeah. And I mean, it's just something I see so often on workshops, though. We all set up at eye level on our cameras so often because that's comfortable work, and if you can get to a slightly different perspective, that right there is going to set your work apart to some degree.
That's nice. A great point. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, regardless, I do love the soft light. I think it was a nice shot. So
the light here is great. Very nice, Jeremy. All right. I don't have any, other editing tips. I think just the composition one is a good one. I think we've got great detail on the face, and we have a little bit of catch light in the eye. I don't know if you added that or if it's natural, but it's great. So nicely done there. All right. Staying in Alaska for a moment, Tim Scott's got this bear on our recent Katmai trip. That's what the bear's saying. Oh, hey, what you guys doing? Let me check things out. Tim and I were talking a little bit. He's curious to know, he has edited this. Has he gone a little too far in darkening the bushes and the leaves around the bear? And I think that might be a hard question to answer if you haven't seen what it looked like kind of straight out of camera. I think this is straight out of camera. And here's our straight out of camera shot. And then here's Timmy's edit. And
so what I would say is I think it's maybe darkened a little bit, but instead of just lightening at all, you could dodge and burn particular areas of the branches to get it to feel multi-dimensional instead of flat.
Yeah.
So maybe by taking a local adjustment brush and kind of just lightening very specific pieces of the branches to kind of frame the bear nicely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's That's great advice. I think that's something we all probably could stand to learn to do more, is instead of just relying on the sliders to get us where we want to be, there's something to be said for really painting in the I shouldn't say painting in the light, but you are painting in light and shadow. It's all about subtlety,
Right.
the art of subtlety. But I think you're right. I think a lot of times the images that really stand out to me, the ones that I know have had some editing done, a lot of times that's what it is, but it's beautiful. And if it's done right. So
the bear also appears just very slightly yellow to me. I'm not sure if that's my screen, but perhaps we could cool down the yellow just a bit on the bear.
Yeah. I think he's a little bit warmer than original, and I think trying to create a little bit of that warmer quality of light was where that came from.
Right.
Yeah. The direction of light, I think, Taylor, you mentioning, dodging and burning a little bit to kind of bring a three-dimensionality to this. I think it would be interesting to see that. It looks to me like, in my memory, a little bit off to the top right is where our light source was coming from. So kind of keeping that in mind, Tim, as you are dodging and burning in this shot, I think would be good. I love his kind of like forlorn look. He's just like, I got a sticker in my ear.
The other thing, the only other thing I would say is maybe just remove some of those little white streaks. There's one kind of right down in the bottom middle that's, I guess it's a branch or something. I don't know. Sometimes those little highlights can be a little distracting on the edges. It's minor stuff, but I think it's a gorgeous image. It's just really make sure you clean it up,
Yeah. I see Roger suggested in chat, what if we come in past the rocks? Do we get in too tight and do we lose our kind of depth in that shot?
Yeah, I'd hate for the bear to look beheaded.
It's just sitting on a wall.
That's right. It's just somebody's ivy covered wall with a trophy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I was thinking the same thing, but
part of the story.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I think it's one of those things you have to try it. You have to see. And Tim, I would imagine you probably did. You're pretty proficient, but I think the rocks work well. I think it's just all about, they give it some context of where this was. So.
Okay, nice. Thanks, Tim. We're going to move on. Another from Mike. So we're going to be fairly quick with this. With these days, when we have a lot to do, we try to do just one from each each intern. But Mount St. Helens, Milky Way. Gosh, there's a lot to love here. But real quick, I'm going to comment because it might be something that is harder to see after this image has been, obfuscated by the internet, is we've got a lot of noise in the shadows, which is what happens in lower light shots. And then you do a little bit of editing. And oftentimes out on workshops, I'm asked about long exposure noise reduction. That's the setting in camera that will battle that back. And typically I have it turned off, except when I want to make sure that I'm really getting a clean shot of the landscape at a longer exposure, because that long exposure noise reduction does stuff in camera that Lightroom noise reduction can't do. And even in a fancy program like Topaz, denoise can't quite do. It finds those hot pixels. We've got a couple little white spots here and there that are being picked up. And so, Mike, in that situation, I don't know if you're compositing or if this is one single shot, you might find that turning that on is going to give you a little bit better results. And the only other thing I notice is it feels like you may have brushed a little bit brighter Milky Way and extended that across this gap, and it doesn't feel 100% accurate. And I might be being too picky. It's something I've run into personally in doing local area adjustments on my own Milky Way shots. You want to be very careful to keep the kind of edges of the Milky Way realistic.
He says it is a single shot. He says so.
It's a shot. Yeah.
So the noise is probably because it's being aggressively brightened down there. I've run into that problem before. So possibly something that I've done in the past that's really helped is I don't do composites per se, but I will do a time blend from time to time where I take a different image of that mountain, maybe earlier or later in the evening when there's more light, or even just a longer exposure, maybe 1 or 2 minutes to get a little bit of that starlight on it. It'll be a cleaner shot.
Yeah.
Good tips. Yeah, nice. Beautiful location though, Mike, and the Milky Way is gorgeous.
Definitely.
Nice. All right, Eric Anderson has this shot.
I love
Eric's,
it.
I think, are usually Tasmania. Yeah,
Awesome.
that's nice.
Yeah, I'm such a fan of long exposures. So anything seascapes like this, I think the colors just, it says dream world.
Yeah.
Very beautiful. The only the critique I would offer is it looks like the rock jetty in the kind of towards the middle right-hand side of the photo got cut off. And I would really like for it to have a natural terminus in the scene because it would allow my eye to see the final resting place of that rock.
Yep.
Yeah. Without that, I think, maybe coming in a little bit to make it feel like it's a much more deliberate framing that maybe those rocks extend. We seem to be so close to the edge.
Yeah.
Here.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely an unintentional tangent the way it was. So
yeah, I agree.
But otherwise, really, really cool shot.
Yeah,
beautiful.
You
have this is for anybody watching, you can't see the metadata. This is a 13-second exposure, which gives us this nice smooth water. I feel like we're even starting to see a little bit of motion in the clouds, which just kind of creates this dreamy look, and very, very nice.
Cool.
Gorgeous.
Thanks, Eric. Sean has sunflower. I think Sean had a sunflower field last week, and now here is a different one with, I think last week we struggled to really find a subject within a beautiful field of sunflowers, and now we've got a subject. We have
I love it.
Yeah, that's very nice. I almost wonder though, you can, guys, both of you can shout at me if you think this is a terrible idea. What if we come in and
100%
make this? Yeah.
I agree. I think you did maybe a little too tight for my taste. But what I really like is that underappreciated detail of the bouquet in that sunflower that's closer to us.
Yeah, in the foreground there.
Yeah, the foreground. I really like
I agree.
that.
Yeah. This is a great example of important elements in the frame, but they have breathing room between them, which helps give a sense of depth. They're not only being out of focus, but also this little bit of a gap here before we get to this kind of central subject, and really, really nice.
Yeah.
I love it. Nice job, Sean. Great. All right, and we're going to wrap up with Deb's curiosity.
Oh wow.
I have nothing to say. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a really cool just frame. I mean, the way it's just so simple.
A little bit of catch late in the eye. We're talking about rule of thirds. Really, really nice here.
I'm wondering just a slight thing that I'm noticing, and maybe it's just the way I'm seeing it on my screen. The black, the black background is blending a lot with the black on the bird. And so I'm not seeing the distinction as much. I see it. It's just a little subtle. I don't know if there's any way to bring. So you'd have to play around with it. It's so subtle. It's just.
Would you, David, like to see just a little bit more hint of the body down here too? Is that where you're going?
I mean, maybe it has this striking visual appeal at first glance. You're like, oh wow, So it has all that. I just feel like I lose a little bit of the outline of the body.
It's funny because I actually love that.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's so interesting how different. I mean, that's what the benefit of this is, right? Is to have voices.
Well, and it's one of those like sometimes I'll think out a suggestion like that, kind of just like think out loud. Just to see what does it do if we mess with it? Because sometimes you might be like, because it's not like it really bothers me a ton. I just was like, I wonder if there's something to do with that, and maybe not. Yeah,
I think I fall in between you two because I love the fact that you can see it all the way off the back, so the body is there, it turns black, but down here it fades. And is so subtle. So I think that's really cool. Deb,
the style is reminiscent of like I see a lot of equine photos that are like this, like a black horse that is shot in shadow, underexposed, rim lighting, and parts of the horse just disappear.
Yeah,
and that's what it reminds me of. That's probably why it's resonating with me.
Yeah. Well, it's very, I mean, it's one of those like, could you see this hanging on your wall? Yes. I mean, it's got that kind of appeal to it. So it's, yeah, there's not a whole lot to critique.
No. Deb is asking specifically if we feel like this would be a good entry into IPC. Taylor, many of our members are PPA members as well and participate in that, both districts and international competition. I would say yes, I think so. From what I see here, Deb, I certainly think this would be a worthy contestant. But
can I ask you, am I crazy? Is this a stuffed toucan or is it real?
Oh,
am I crazy for asking that?
No, I assumed it's real, but I don't know that. These feathers just look very healthy and real.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah.
On my laptop screen, I cannot tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you all are seeing it after it's been through StreamYard and out to YouTube. Deb says it's a real toucan. Okay.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
That makes it 10 times better.
Yeah.
I will say one more thing though. Yeah, it's good to know. But I will say one more thing. I think the black at the tip of the beak, you're seeing kind of like a little bit of reflection of light. Mm-hmm. And it's not bad. Just I would see what it looks like to darken it down just a touch. I don't mind having a little highlight there, but I think if you're going to enter it into competition, that might be something that would strike against you.
That's sound advice.
Yeah. And the only other thing that I struggle with, Deb, too, is a little bit, if we're talking about IPC, where they get very, very picky, is we're starting to get a little soft focus back here. And I think I'd like to see that just a little bit sharper. The feathers on the throat here are fantastic, but the top of the beak starts to fall out of focus a little bit. So very cool. Okay. That is the images for this week, and we're going to come back to us. So if you've been leaning in close to stare at these images, take a moment to sit back. And thank you everybody who submitted images. I know sometimes it can be tricky to put your work out there in front of people, in front of the world, and get feedback. But we love doing this, and we really feel like it's one of the best ways to grow as a photographer, other than just being out there photographing yourself. And I think Steve Skurch says that he's a regular co-host on the show, or often co-host. You can put these pictures on Facebook, and your mom and your friends are going to be like, "That's the best thing ever." But that's like having a diet full of candy. It's delicious, it's easy to eat, but it's not really healthy for you.
Yeah.
So I like that thought. That's what I say. I like that thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit. As I said, I often try to have a central theme or topic that we spend a little bit of time discussing on the show. And as I said last week, it was like how to get better family vacation pictures. Now, and I asked a kind of a fun question on Instagram. It was like, how often are you trying to blend a family vacation with getting beautiful landscape shots or kind of cool shots that you're really proud of? And most people said, you know what, I've learned to basically temper my expectations, because there are a lot of constraints when you're on a family vacation. You can't necessarily get up at 4 a.m. and go photograph sunrise in the summer and then come back and be a functioning human and enjoy the rest of your family. I mean, you can. I did try it once, but I ended up having somebody else have to drive the rental car because I was exhausted and I couldn't keep my eyes open later that day. So that was many years ago, and I've learned since, if it's a family vacation, then we're doing family things and spending family time.
Yeah.
But if you're traveling for the purpose of photographer, and Taylor, you're somebody who is doing that often and now also teaching on workshops, I would love to hear some thoughts from you all. And I'm happy to go first. If you want a moment to collect your thoughts, just let me know about tips that will help people get better photos when they have a destination in mind purposefully for photography.
Mm-hmm.
Either
so you're talking about non-family trips, just photography.
Yeah, like you set out, you're like, I'm going to go to the Grand Tetons. How do you make sure that you come away with some pictures that you're really happy with?
I have 2 tips that immediately come to mind, and it's what I would tell anyone that I'm trying to give advice to. And the first one is, you have to release yourself of that pressure. That's not fair. People who are photographing professionally, I think that it's very reasonable to say that you're lucky if you get 10 or 12 portfolio quality images a year. And I think that's really even ambitious. And that's for people shooting full time. So you need to relax and release yourself of the pressure of getting the shot. Okay, because that's not fair or realistic, and it's going to take away from your experience. So go with fewer expectations and really invest yourself. So that's number one. But the second thing is slow down a little bit. People tend to think, well, I'm never going to go to the Tetons again. I'll never be there again. So here's my list of 2,700 things that I have to do while I'm in the Tetons. And they're not slowing down and actually seeing what's around them, because you're just going down this list, seeing everything that's on your list that you're trying to hit. And it doesn't allow you the flexibility to pursue better lighting conditions. Or what if you fall in love with one place and you just want to revisit it 5 times? You have to give yourself permission to do that. You'll get better pictures, I promise, if you just slow down.
Yeah,
it's great.
Great tips. Very good tips.
Yeah.
David Carr, do you have anything you want to share?
I mean, yeah, I definitely would second those. I think the whole idea of lowering your expectations is super important.
Yeah.
And I even see this on some of the McKay trips, because I know like they've paid good money to go on these trips. They're excited to be there. They're in places they've never been before. Maybe they have, but it's, they're excited to be back. And it's like, oh my gosh, we have to get every shot possible. We have to do everything. And I understand that from a like trying to get the most bang for your buck, not just monetarily, but also just the time that you're spending there. But there is so much about photography that is unpredictable. And I say it all the time. Some of my favorite shots in my whole portfolio were the ones that I wasn't even trying to get. It was some throwaway in my mind. Oh, I'll just take a picture of that. I might as well. And then it ends up being one of my favorites. And then the one that I was super excited about and all, geared up for ends up being and that happens so often. And it's not to say that there's like a rule to that, but you just have to be willing to take the surprises when they come and sort of let go of the extreme expectations of what you thought you were there to get. Cause so often you end up coming away with stuff. You're like, I had no idea I was going to get that shot. Or you might come away and say, man, I really didn't get anything. Like South Dakota, I didn't really expect to get much. I mean, I knew it would be fun. I knew we would see some beautiful places, but I just thought, I don't know what I'm there to photograph, but I ended up with some images I'm really, really happy with. So it was a surprise. And then I've been some places where I just didn't get a whole lot, and that's okay.
Bouncing off what you said about workshops, what I tend to see a lot is people get really tunnel view on what is the mission for the photo that day. So I'm just going to use the example of, we're going to go get sunrise at Mesa Arch, right? Everyone wants this like iconic photo. You have this idea of what it is that you really, really want. You want this photo, and you're so laser focused on that one photo that you're not paying attention to anything else around you. And there's one of two things that's going to happen. One, the light's going to be perfect, and you're going to walk away with 2,500 pictures of Mesa Arch and nothing else, or the light's going to be terrible and you're going to be bummed and brokenhearted. And I think that's where we come in as hopefully instructors and educators in the field to say, hey, that's great, but like, look at your feet, look at these textures in the rock. Wow, look at this amazing cactus. Look at this bristle cone that's growing right there. And just letting people know that it doesn't have to be about this one thing on a mission. You're never going to know what you're going to stumble across. You could come across exactly like what you said, these pictures that you didn't know were going to be your favorites, but often they are, because they tell a really unique story about a place. And when you have an iconic photo, many people have taken that photo, and it's okay. I mean, everyone wants to go get it. God knows I have a picture of Mesa Arch. Sure. But, the ones that resonate the most with me are the ones that I just saw this little scene that maybe other people didn't see, or maybe no one's photographed, and I get to walk away with something that's truly like mine.
That's great.
Yeah, and that is very rewarding. Yeah, these are great tips. I'm piggybacking on these two as well. One is kind of similar to the slow down, but it's schedule your time around the good light. I mean, I think people watching this show are fully aware of how much difference a midday shot from an early morning or late evening shot is going to look, with those, the kind of shoulders of the day looking so much more interesting and so much more than just kind of a snapshot of a location. So setting up someplace, waiting for that light, and then having, you know, a shorter list, as you said, Taylor, so that you don't feel like I can only spend 5 minutes here before I move on to the next place. Sit and wait for things to develop. The best example I have of how I was rewarded for that was Lake Matheson in New Zealand. Set up for this morning shot, this gorgeous reflection, clouds above the mountains. Everything was epic, except the light was just kind of flat. And that was really the only place that I had wanted to shoot on my way back up from a workshop, as I had a few, you know, I had like 36 spare hours. And so I just waited. And I was also shooting a time lapse, and I love that it illustrates this so well. There was about a 3-minute window where the whole sky went pink before it went back to flat gray. And I got it. And I was just like, God, that was awesome. And not only was it fun to sit there, but there were a couple other photographers that were there, just were interesting people from around the world. And so kind of meeting them and talking to them was all part of the experience of traveling. And so that kind of plays into that. It's not just getting the photo. It's also the people you meet and the experiences you have while you're out there on these trips.
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely.
And the other tip I have is, you know, I threw out this as an example, like the, you know, Grand Tetons, but travel photography could mean, you know, deep in a city or in some land that, you know, you don't speak the language. If you could learn a few words that of whatever country you're traveling in that allow you to ask, hey, may I take your photo? Or hi, how are you? May I take your photo? And thank you. That's huge, because you know, we want these pictures of people that we find in other countries that are interesting, but I also don't want to be that guy that just shoves a camera in somebody's face, snaps a picture, and leaves. That seems incredible.
Yeah. Oh gosh, you're saying, you're preaching.
If someone, you know,
a lot.
I'm sitting out front in my house and someone did that to me, I'd be like, what the hell? But that's how we so often, and I've done it too, often ask when we're traveling. And so if you can take the time, it's part of that slow down too, but also learning a little bit of the language so that you can interact with people. Oh, so much better. And you're going to get better pictures because of it.
Definitely.
Too, because then the person is going to open up to you.
Yeah, that's great advice. Absolutely.
Yeah, I had an experience in Greenland where, you know, the culture is really different and interesting, and people want to photograph the lives of these people, and that's understandable. I mean, of course, you want pictures of their houses and the Greenland dogs and everything, but I have seen tourists literally putting their cameras like through people's windows. It's so violating, you know. So just remembering that, you know, when you go into another culture, this is not a zoo. These are real people. These are their real lives. They deserve to be respected. So that would definitely result in a more positive interaction.
One tip I heard, it might have been Scott Kelby said this a while back. If you're in a foreign country and let's say you're walking around a city and there's somebody interesting and you want to take their photo, and you don't know how to really ask them, you know, you have to be prepared for the rejection. But if they are gracious enough to let you do that, you look at them, you point to your camera and just, you know, like, would, you know, kind of gesturing, is this okay? And then show them the photo.
It's universal.
Yeah.
We all know what you're trying to do.
And you know, turn the back of the camera around. And then a lot of times they're kind of excited to see it. And I mean, depending on the culture, depending on who it is, but, yeah, I mean, there's a way to approach that, but again, you have to be willing to put the camera down as well. And I will say too.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that it's also appropriate if you have people in your photos that you offer to send them a copy of it. There may be other opinions on that, but I think that is a very appropriate thing to do. If I'm ever photographing, you know, I've had pictures of this guy playing his guitar or the Grand Canyon or whatever. I mean, sometimes there's a person who's just in the perfect position, and I always will make an effort to hand them a card and say, please email me and I'll give you a copy of this photo.
Yeah, that's cool.
I just think that's an appropriate thing to do.
Yeah,
that's great. That's great. Roger makes the important point. These tips really good for landscape, especially when we're talking about light and slowing down. But with wildlife, actual wildlife, especially, you take what you can get. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I will say though that a lot of times with much wildlife, you do find it most active. In the morning and in the evening, because like us, most wildlife doesn't like being around and during the midday. They feel a little more vulnerable. Especially in the summer, it's a little bit hot as well.
But also there's two different approaches with wildlife, and it's however you want to cut it. But, you have the pursuit of wildlife, right? So if you've been to the Tetons, you're familiar with these two strategies. One is that you drive around like a crazy person hoping to see a bear. And the other one is that you sit and you wait where you think a bear could possibly cross, and you study their patterns of behavior and see what times of day they cross. So there's two ways to do that type of wildlife.
Yeah,
and
cool.
It just comes down to your own approach. I tend to advocate for the sit and wait, because the more you understand that animal, probably the better photos you're going to get.
Yeah.
That's good.
Good stuff. Okay. All right. Let's move on to Q&A. I don't think. No, we're not going to do any news. We got a couple of questions that folks have asked. One I pulled from our community page because I thought it was such a great question, and I started to write a short answer for it, and then it got longer and longer. So I wanted to share that a little bit. And then I also wanted to hear from both of you all. David Patch was asking, how important is it to update the firmware of your camera? Talor, I'll start with you as a new guest. How religious are you about updating the firmware of your camera?
Oh, I'm so lazy with this. I know you're supposed to do it. I literally have a 2-month-old email in my inbox for the Canon R5 update, and it's still unopened. So you be better than me. That's my advice. Because I suck at this.
Well, that was another question. David, I want your opinion in just a second, but that was another question of Talor, what do you shoot with? A Canon R5 system? I would say update, because they've made some pretty nice changes.
I know. It's totally... It's pathological for me at this point. I'm just ignoring it.
That's funny.
And did you get that email from B&H or from Canon direct?
From B&H.
Yeah, that's that. And so that's something I answered back to David, that's another nice benefit of buying from B&H these days, is they seem to do a good job of saying, hey, you bought this camera from us. The manufacturer has let us know there's a firmware update, and we're letting you know. Because unless you've registered the camera, which, geez, I'm terrible at that, you usually don't get notified that there are firmware updates. Yeah. David Carr, how about you? Are you religious about updating firmware?
I'm not religious about it. A lot of times I'll forget that there's a new firmware update. I usually will get a notification that there's going to be. I go to Nikon Rumors every day just to see what's brewing, and they're always telling me about the latest updates. When David asked how important it is, it's not like life or death important. It's not like, oh my gosh, your whole photography trajectory is just in the tank because you didn't update your firmware. Right. But there are some benefits that will come down the line depending on what camera you're using, what the brand is, and what the firmware is able to do. If it's something to do with autofocus being much faster, or being able to focus on this type of animal now, or that stuff can help you, and it usually, I don't hear of a lot of firmware updates that cause problems, except for like on computers and things like that. But I think just go ahead and do it. The stumbling block for me is the whole process. I feel like I always have to go and read the directions again on how to do it.
Always. I can never remember it.
Yeah. And whenever these camera manufacturers can get with the 21st century and make it where everything is you do it just over Wi-Fi. I would imagine Sony's got that now, but no, Nikon doesn't.
No.
Okay.
But here's the irony. I actually made a note to mention this because it just pisses me off. Samsung, with their NX1 camera, when you first bought it was like, hey, you should connect to your Wi-Fi. And then if it knew there was a firmware update, it would prompt you on the back of the camera. You would do it all through the camera over Wi-Fi. So ahead of its time. Come on, rest of you manufacturers, make this easy. I can't even with a current. I gotta finish my rant, David. With the current M1 Max, I can't even update my Sony. It won't even work. I have to get an older Mac, or I have to go borrow, for God's sakes, a Windows computer.
Oh man,
it's terrible.
I'm sorry.
Okay, you can borrow from me anytime.
No, it's just
yeah. So that's all I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Oh, John says the Z6 and can do it via SnapBridge. So from a phone, so you can do the Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Interesting.
If you can get SnapBridge working.
Yeah. Yes, right. True. There's no class action lawsuits about that. So, I mean, yeah, firmware updates, I'd say typically are minor, but more often these days, manufacturers are adding some nice features through them. And different manufacturers have kind of a history. Fuji, Brian Scanlon says he updates his religiously. I mean, Fuji has made some serious changes to their cameras for the better through firmware updates over the years. I feel like if I had to put give a first place, since it's the Olympics right now, gold medal goes to Fuji for firmware updates. I think they've done some fantastic stuff over the years that make you feel like you've got a better camera, even though you don't have to spend any more money on it.
That's good.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, GJ Bernard, I think I pronounced, he says, a good point. Like if you have firmware updates over Wi-Fi straight to the camera, that could be problematic because a lot of times it will tell you, do not turn your camera off while this is updating because you can screw everything up. So,
yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, but there are ways, it could do some checks and stuff like that.
Or it could go to a buffer that then I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. But yeah, I guess the camera manufacturers have our best interests in mind. Maybe I don't know. It certainly feels cumbersome these days. When this again, Samsung NX1, this was 2012. Now, you might say, well, where are the Samsung cameras today? Okay, yes, they're not around anymore, but I don't think it was because they had fantastic Wi-Fi firmware updates. It was for other reasons. Yeah. All right. And there a couple people pointed out that they typically update as soon as firmware updates come out, unless they have some big trip planned coming up. Because yes, you mentioned this, David Carr. Every once in a while, a firmware update comes out that does introduce a problem that you might not have had in the first place. So if you're not in a rush, it's nice to wait a week or two and see if anything negative comes out. But that is pretty rare. So as a camera nerd and as also somebody who's makes a living talking about cameras, I typically update as soon as possible so that I can talk about it and see if it's something interesting, or tell people that it was a horrible idea, don't do it, wait until they fix that, something like that.
Well, I mean, you see it with computer software, with certain updates. I updated Photoshop recently, that was a few months ago, and for whatever reason, it just did not work well on my computer. It was not lining up with my operating system the way that, and I would go to zoom in Photoshop, like a pinch zoom on a trackpad, and it would just take forever, and it would just like this slow.
I remember you talking about this.
And it took forever, and I had to like force quit it. So every now and then something like that does get screwed up. Thankfully they try to fix it as quickly as possible if they're smart.
Yeah. All right. Last question we've got as we start to wrap up. Kevin wants to know any recommendations on a travel tripod. He's headed to Yosemite at the end of next month. He's looking for a light, stable tripod, budget under $150 if at all possible.
That is a really tough price point.
Yeah,
it is. I think MePhoto has their aluminum models that I would be happy to recommend. Let me go to B&H's website here. But Talor, without that budget, what do you like for a tripod?
Oh gosh, it's not a fair question. I use a really Right Stuff tripod, and I realize that that's not realistic for a lot of people. It's realistic for me because it's my full-time job. The Gitsos are very similar and sturdy and at a slightly better price point, but again, the price is pretty brutal on them. The Peak design, if you want something super light, I have had good user experiences with the Peak design tripod that's super lightweight, really compact. They're a little bit too light for a lot of my use, but if you're traveling, that could be a really good fit.
I don't love their heads. I love
I don't love that either.
They get, and I love that they made some smart design choices, but the head just...
I know. I think it takes getting used to, though. The more I've fidgeted with it, the more I liked it. But
that could be. What do I want to do here? I want to share. Oh, I've lost my screen. Hold on. Sorry. The MePhoto Road Trip Aluminum does come in at $160, Kevin. Let me see if I can figure out how to get that on the screen. I don't know why I've lost my screen. And I think that would work. I would be okay recommending that. Where is it? Right there. Yeah, it's a little bit over your budget, but it's good. It weighs just under 4 pounds, gets tall enough, sturdy enough. We've been recommending the MePhoto brand, so I've seen them on workshops for years, and they're fine. I will say, go ahead, David.
Well, I would say also just don't be afraid to look for used gear. Because there's so much stuff out there that people buy it, and then 3 months later they decide they don't like it. They get something else, and they barely used it. And you might be able to find even something that's several years old, but it's a tripod. I mean, if it was, as long as it's not your grandpa's tripod that weighs 90 pounds, and, as long as it's something that is remotely mobile, you might be able to find a good deal.
Yeah, there definitely are some, there's lots of options on here. I think Benro makes decent tripods as well. And there's our Gitsos, which, yes, are lovely. David Carr, I know you're a fan too. They are lovely, lovely tripods.
Yeah, they're really great.
But
I do love my Gitso. Yeah, I bought mine used, but I still paid a lot of money for it. So
yeah. I would say, I just mentioned MePhoto. They have an S line that I don't love. They have a little bit of a harder plastic on the knobs and on the legs that just rubs me the wrong way. So I don't love those as much. But their general non-S are decent and should fit that price range you asked about, Kevin. All right. Hey, I think that Richard wants to know, how much weight will the MePhoto handle? Oh, that's a good question. I think it's in the neighborhood of about 20 pounds ish, if I had to guess off the top of my head, which should be fine for most gear that you see. Let's see. Load capacity, 17 pounds. So unless you're putting really big lenses on there, you should be well within that range. And just be smart about how you set up, especially the more budget minded and a little bit shorter tripods. As you get to their full height, you want to be smart about setting them up, making sure a leg is under the kind of the direction of the lens to make sure you're supporting that.
Yeah.
Good tips.
Pam is asking where I would recommend looking for used gear. I mean, B&H has a great used department with, they rank everything, and they're very accurate, and they have a 30-day return policy. If you get it and you're like, it's not what I thought, it's a pretty safe way to go. Adorama, I've bought used gear from them, KEH, and then even Facebook Marketplace, if you're careful. And if you go to some specific pages, there's some groups and pages you can go to. You can join these used photo gear groups.
Buy, sell.
Yeah, and they're great groups. I've sold a lot of stuff in those groups, and it's always worked out really well. So just be smart.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. That's great. And KEH, I've been talking to, going to be able to offer through Penn members, and I think to the general public too, an extra 5% on trade-ins, nice. And I think purchases as well. So KEH, a lot of times we ask where to sell used gear, and KEH is a great place to do that. Really low hassle and just easy to work with. And then, of course, buying from them is good as well.
Yeah, so. Located in my hometown. So if I buy something from KEH, I just go pick it up.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh, my earbuds just lost audio, so it's coming out of this. That means it's a great time to end the show, apparently. I'm not sure why I lost audio out of those. But Taylor, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for
having you on the show. Yeah, it was great.
It was great. If you're still watching, thank you. You should go follow Taylor at her Instagram, and it's linked right down below this as well. So go check her out and see what she's up to. You have a lot of really cool trips planned in the future. You're leading workshops as well. Where else would you like to send people other than your Instagram? Where should we tell them to go?
You should just check out my Instagram. There's a link to my website on there where I have a lot of free resources, from podcasts to webinars, some academic papers. I have all kinds of weird stuff on there because I'm a big nerd. And also I have some really informative galleries. So they directly link back to my climate research. So if you want to get nerdy with me while you look at some pictures, you should check that out.
Sounds great. Awesome.
Great.
So folks, please go do that. And David Carr, thank you so much for hanging out with us, as you often do. We really appreciate it.
It's been great, as always.
Yeah, and you should, of course, go follow David Carr. And Roger pointed out that still had your old Instagram handle with the _in under the YouTube handle. I have fixed that.
That's thank you.
During the show.
I
So-
realized I gave somebody a business card the other day, and it has my old Instagram, so I gotta update everything. So
Gotcha. And again, if you're watching the show still, thank you, chat room. Really appreciate you hanging out and asking the questions and making the points, especially as we talked about firmware updates and golden light, things like that. So if you are still watching and you haven't yet, hit that thumbs up. That's a really nice way to tell other people that this show is worthwhile. And if you wanted to, you could hit that share button, post on Twitter or Facebook and say, hey, this was a really fun and informative discussion that I think photographers would be interested in. And of course, if you're not part of PEN and you'd like to join, learn more at photorec.tv/PEN. We will be back next week. I don't know who's guest hosting with me, but we'll be back because I won't be traveling midweek, which is great. And,
awesome.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So
Sounds
thanks,
good.
everybody.
Yeah, thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Adios.